reasons, and shouldn't everybody be in the streets is the question I'm asking. Shouldn't the Antifa and the Trump people be getting together and saying we're all catching hell because of Reaganomics, and that's the real reason, and we're being distracted by culture and race? Go ahead, you say no.
I think it's false equivalency. Antifa is a very fringe group. They're not organized. I'm not fond of them. I think every group, I am obviously a committed leftist. They are leftist lunatics for the most part. I'm not fond of them. They come out.
They're violent.
Many of them are. I oppose that.
Do you oppose violence?
Generally, there are times when violence is probably necessary. For my best example is South Africa, where Nelson Mandela finally had no option except to go to the armed struggle, because nonviolence would not have worked in South Africa. They had to do what they had to do.
I thought he was peaceful, Mandela.
No, he was not.
And
no,
he was like Gandhi. And
no, he was not.
He was not.
Nelson Mandela.
He was a terrorist. Yeah.
No, Nelson Mandela.
I thought he was peaceful.
No, Nelson Mandela went to the armed struggle. I spent a lot of time in South Africa. I know all about that.
Yeah,
the ANC tried to be peaceful. It was impossible. Nelson Mandela went to the armed struggle. I knew many of the people who were involved in that. So that was an example where violence had to be. If you were on the slave ships, you had to do violence. So
to get free.
To get free, you had to kill your oppressors.
Mm-hmm.
John Brown had to do what he had to do, etc., etc., etc. But in general, I never engaged in violence in the civil rights movement. I was always peaceful. Now, Antifa, a lot of them are left-wing lunatics.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what happened on January 6th was an insurrection, and they were full of white nationalists, white racists.
Please.
No, they were. They were.
Okay.
There's nothing that you cannot defend the indefensible.
My sister was there. My niece was there. They're not white racists.
Many of them were.
Okay.
They had no business breaking the law to bust into the Capitol.
I agree with that.
They have no business.
Doing,
a peaceful protest was fine, even though the premise was utterly absurd.
Yeah.
The election was
Paul,
fair.
Can I ask? Is there anger as Americans at the system justified?
No. Because they were operating on a false premise. Donald Trump lost the election. He lost the election, period. They created this whole false narrative that the election was stolen. Nonsense. Totally nonsense. Joe Biden is the lawfully elected president of the United States.
I disagree.
And Ricky's going to respond. Ricky has a good time to respond, but I want to follow up just with one question, because I hear your point. If their premise is that the election was stolen, but if their premise is that the government officials are greedy and corrupt, and is that something to be angry about?
Be angry about it and peacefully protest. You cannot storm the Capitol.
Agreed.
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 So
That
many
was
people with Confederate flags.
agreed.
And
Nobody
one
should have
with
breached.
Nazi-
Nobody should have breached the door. It was inappropriate. Totally agree. Inappropriate. But there was tens and tens and tens of thousands that didn't go inside. That did it right. That stayed outside.
Fine, but they have every right to do that. They have every right.
But
to
going
do that.
inside, it was a bad thing.
Every right. They can have
It was-
all the protests they want.
They got swept up and caught up in the moment.
And we all agree that they shouldn't
First
have tried
Amendment.
to storm the Capitol. But Ricky, though, can you give a voice to what it is? I assume you identify with that group on some level. Let us
The
understand.
reason
Help
I don't
Paul
think the
to
election's
understand.
fair.
Help Paul to
Okay.
understand why are middle white Americans so angry?
The reason we are concerned for our country and our children's futures and our grandchildren's future is because what we saw happen on this election was a coordinated suppression of voter facts, of information to the voter, we think. Specifically for me, Hunter Biden's laptop, which is now
trivial.
It's not trivial because,
It doesn't matter what Hunter Biden did. If you round
if
up,
his father benefited and his family, if Hunter Biden and his family benefited financially because of his father's positions in the government, that's illegal, and can't.
then fine, indict him.
Can't.
Hunter Biden is such a ridiculous distraction.
Okay, but what I'm saying is the mainstream media, which I call Marxist streaming media at this point,
It's not
they
Marxist.
hid the Hunter Biden, they said it was Russian disinformation 10 days before the election. We had the business partners for the Bidens on television, Bobulinski, talking about their business deals. The FBI has this laptop 2 years and they did nothing about it. So we believe that there's a cover-up, all of us. We believe there's a cover-up that's been happening, a deep state cover-up.
Deep state? Where's this come from?
Where's it come from? It comes from not trusting what happened this election.
Let me apply a little bit of, okay, Paul, Noam Chomsky would say that there are corporate conglomerates, transnational corporations that have more power than local governments.
They always have.
But that's what we mean by deep state. We mean that there's individuals who give orders to Biden and orders to other individuals,
correct,
and they basically have to follow them. Otherwise, they'll.
We believe there's a shadow government, probably within the CIA. It started in 1947, when the NSC was started, and they wanted consistency in government and policy, and they didn't want, when there was a new election, policies to change.
And they're stopping Donald Trump from a second term.
Now, again, now that's fair. Let's address what Paul is saying. Why in the world would elite rich people not want Donald Trump to be president? That's the biggest contradiction with QAnon. It's like he's one of them.
For some reason, all of these corporate overlords, they all went. It seemed like socialist. They all went liberal-leaning socialist.
I'm gonna help you. A corporation can't be socialist. It's a contradiction in terms. It's a contradiction in terms.
Okay.
That's like saying you're a slave owner and you're a socialist. No, you're not. You have slaves.
Yeah.
You understand why that's a contradiction?
Yeah, I do.
A corporate like Jeff Bezos could never claim to be a socialist unless he were to disgorge his billion. If he took his $100 billion that he made just in 2020 and he gave it to the poor, then he could say he's a socialist.
Joe Biden is not a socialist.
Correct.
Yeah.
Janet Yellen is not a socialist.
But addressing this point though, because I asked you to voice America's anger, and with respect, I don't think you did a good job. Because I think America is angry about things that have nothing to do with the election, and you focus on
the election is huge.
The election. But since you did that,
if we don't have trust in the election system, we think the government's going to fail.
Would we be better off with this narcissistic lunatic as the second-term president of the United States?
Anybody that fights, for the American people, I think he was fighting for us. I think
for me,
I personally think what's happening with this whole COVID thing and stuff. Anyway. Back to America.
Yeah, we can get to COVID. That's on the list. But, okay.
Back to America. I don't trust the elections. What I saw. Mainstream media cover up, like I said, Hunter Biden's story 10 days before the election. That to me is voter suppression and voter manipulation.
Who voted improperly? Black folks?
So listen, when I voted this year, I didn't show ID. I went to my polling place. I said, "Do I need to provide ID?" And I was in Agora, okay, and they said, "No, you don't have to provide ID. Just type in your name and address." I could have put any name and any address and voted for anybody else.
And
that's not right.
Do you have?
I also got 3 mail-in ballots to my house. 1 in my name and 2 in the previous owner's names.
How much evidence?
So there's something wrong in the election.
We have scholars who have investigated. We have almost no evidence of voter fraud.
We have tons of evidence, sir. We just haven't. The courts haven't seen it. The courts haven't exposed. The courts haven't adjudicated on it. It's never been tried.
60-some suits have been dismissed.
Dismissed without seeing evidence.
So they've thrown it out. They're part of the deep state that said we don't want to deal with this.
Sir, I
don't.
don't.
The judiciary is part of the deep state. Everybody's part of the deep state.
Sir, I don't know, but there's 75 million of us that believe something fishy went on.
And there are 80-some million who voted the other way. So I guess you want the minority to rule.
No, sir. I just want to get to the bottom of it. And I wish the Supreme Court had heard the evidence and looked at it. Because if it was false, then they could have shown America that it was false. Instead, now they haven't even looked at the case, and it leads us to further suspicion.
You got 6 people on the Supreme Court. I can name all 6 of them who lean to your side, but somehow Clarence Thomas, Sam Alito, John Roberts, and the rest of them, they've said, no, we don't want to do this.
I don't know why. I think that's a shirking of the responsibility of their office and their duty.
And what would have happened if they had overturned the election? Then we would.
If it was just, then we wouldn't.
And what would the 80 million, the almost 7 million people who voted the other way, what would that have left them with?
I agree. It was a bad situation both ways. If it was taken away,
They would have said,
it was a bad.
We had 7 million more people voting for Joe Biden, and the Supreme Court has overturned that. Would that have left American democracy in a better position?
No, sir. It would have been a shit show.
Can I throw another wrench
Yeah.
in there? There are 27 million people in the United States who have criminal records. Now, without being racial, do you think that more than the half of those are black and brown people of those 27 million?
I don't know.
Probably, right?
Okay.
Now, if they were allowed to vote instead of being denied the right to vote because of their felony convictions, that's 27 million people. How do you think that would have fared for Donald Trump? And it's a rhetorical question in the sense that there's election manipulation all throughout the system. It's not just quote voter fraud. There's the electoral college, there's jerry rigging and gerrymandering, and the fact that 27 million, that's almost a tenth of the population, are excluded from the ballots because they committed a felony, and a lot of these are poverty crimes. So but here's what we're going to do, because this is actually, I think, a very interesting segue, because I think